The appraiser tapped the old cistern cover with the toe of his boot, and the wood gave a soft, hollow sound. It was May of 1988, southern Iowa. The air was already hot by 10 in the morning, and the wind had that dry feel that makes corn leaves curl at the edges. Eli Mercer had 140 acres of pasture and hay ground and a little corn he raised for feed. He had 38 beef cows, a dozen spring calves still on the cows, and one old Jersey milk cow his wife kept for the house. He had a farmhouse built in the 20s, an old dairy barn with a big tin roof that rattled when it rained, and a new shallow well drilled in 1979 with an electric pump and a pressure tank in the basement, and he had the old cistern. It sat behind the kitchen porch, close enough to the dairy barn that the barn roof could feed it. A round hole in the ground, 8 feet across and about 13 feet deep, lined with limestone and old brick and coated inside with cement plaster that had cracked in a dozen places. The cover was 2 layers of old planks, swollen and sagging in the middle. Weeds ran the rim, the downspout that once fed it hung loose. The old iron hand pump beside it was missing its handle, and the spout was full of wasp nests. The appraiser's name was Hanley. He was not a bad man. He worked for the bank and wrote what the bank's form told him to write. The insurance man stood beside him, out for this same visit because the bank wanted a note on outbuildings. Hanley knelt and lifted a corner of the cover with a stick. Cool, damp air came up. The inside smelled musty. Water stood at the bottom, 3 feet or so of it, brown and still. He let the cover drop and wrote on his clipboard, "Abandoned cistern. Hazard. No contributory value. Fill or cover." "Ellie," he said, "I cannot lend against a hole under a rotten cover. This does not add value. It subtracts it. A kid falls in, a calf steps through. That's a lawsuit, and the bank has to note it as a liability." The insurance man said if the cover gave way, it wouldn't matter how much water was under it. Fill it or cap it properly and fence it. From the fence line, Harold Pike called over. He'd farmed the quarter to the north for 30 years and had filled his own cistern 10 years back with broken brick and clay. "I filled mine with broken brick," Harold said. "Slept better after. Only thing an old cistern's good for is losing a child or a calf." "You ever check if it's still held?" Eli said. "Held what?" Harold said. "Trouble." Hanley closed the clipboard. "The new well is what counts. That's your water source. That cistern's farm junk." Eli didn't argue. He'd heard versions of this before, and none of them were wrong about the danger. At the co-op that week, the story made its rounds. Eli Mercer fixing the old cistern, bank telling him to fill it, insurance man calling it a death trap, and Clyde Ransom saying what he needed was a deeper well, not a rain barrel underground. The chorus was short and practical, the kind that isn't said to be cruel, just true as far as anybody standing around a feed sack could tell. You cannot water cows with memories. An old cistern is just a grave with water in it. If it was safe, somebody would still be using it. Rainwater won't save a farm in August. A cover costs money. A filled hole stops costing. You cannot borrow against a hole. They weren't wrong to worry. An open cistern is dangerous, full stop, and Eli knew it better than any of them because it sat 40 feet from his own kitchen porch where his own children played. His wife said it plainer than any of them that night at the kitchen table. "I don't care what your father wrote. If that cover gives way when the kids are in the yard, we won't be talking about water." "I know," Eli said. Cover first. That was what his father had taught him, though not in those words. His father had kept a notebook in the kitchen drawer, a little brown book with feed prices and rain totals and a sketch of the cistern on one page. Cistern holds 4,800 gallons when plaster sound. Barn roof fills after 1-inch rain. Use first barrel dirty, then turn to cistern. Never drink without boiling. Good for stock. On the next page, a cistern is not a well. Do not ask it to be one. And below that, a cistern will not find water for you. It only keeps what you were smart enough not to waste. Eli hadn't thought much about that when the new well went in. The new well had pressure. Flip a switch and water came. But he'd noticed 2 things since. Inside the cistern, a white mineral line ran the stone about 10 feet up from the bottom, proof it had once held near full. And even in July, lifting a corner of the rotten cover, the air that came up was cool, and the water below, brown as it was was colder than the pond that grew algae by August. He measured it. 12 feet of usable depth once you left a foot for sediment, roughly 4,500 gallons if the plaster held. Not enough to carry 38 cows through a summer, enough to be a reserve. The new well could only give what the ground had left. The old cistern had kept what the roof had already caught. He fixed it the safe way, because his wife was watching and because the insurance man had been right about the one thing that mattered. A dangerous cistern stays dangerous until you make it safe. The first weekend was the cover and the fence. New treated lumber, 2 layers with a hatch hinged on one side and locked on the other with a hasp and padlock. It sat flush with the stone rim and didn't flex under his weight. He ran a rail fence of posts around the perimeter, far enough back that a cow couldn't reach the hatch from outside it. Cover and hatch, $210. Fence, posts, rails, hardware, $130. The second weekend was the lining. He went down on a wooden ladder with a rope tied off to the barn door, and the rule he'd made with himself was that he would never go in again without his son, 14 years old, standing within shouting distance on the porch. He cleared 12 buckets of old silt off the bottom. He mixed hydraulic cement and worked it into the cracks along the south wall, feathering it smooth, letting the first coat cure overnight before the second. Hydraulic cement, $64. The third weekend was the pump and the gutter. A used pitcher pump from a sale in Centerville, handle and working suction cup intact, for $85. He rebuilt the leather and mounted it over the hatch. He ran new gutter off the barn roof to a first flush barrel, a cut-down 55-gallon drum with a diverter that let the first dirty water off the roof bypass the cistern and hit the ground before the valve shifted to send the cleaner runoff in. Gutter and downspout, $92. First flush barrel and diverter, $35, all in with the mounting hardware and the odds and ends that never make the list, $759. He labeled the pump handle with a strip of tin, not potable, stock and garden use. His wife looked at it from the kitchen window and said it was better than the broken cover and the gap, which was true, and that she didn't want the children near the hatch without him present, which was also true. It's locked, he said. Keys on the kitchen nail. Keep it there, she said. It failed the first time it mattered. A half-inch rain came through in June and washed dust and bird debris straight off the barn roof and past a first flush barrel he hadn't set right. The water in the cistern turned browner than before and smelled worse. The pump lost prime and squealed. A patch in the northeast corner wept a dark streak down the plaster. He pumped a bucket that first week anyway, just to see. It sat brown in the sun for an hour, and the sediment dropped to the bottom, but the smell stayed musty enough that his wife wouldn't let the children anywhere near the hatch, new cover, rail, and lock or not. Harold drove by and said, "You're building a mud well, Eli." Clyde Ransom, the pump dealer, stopped on his way out from servicing the pressure tank and looked at the cistern cover. If that new well's pulling air, you don't need a cistern. You need a deeper hole. A cistern won't give you pressure. "I know it won't give me pressure," Eli said. "Then what will it give you?" "Time." Clyde laughed, not unkindly. Time doesn't come out of a faucet. By the end of that first week, the cistern hadn't saved him a gallon. It had cost him $759 and made the yard smell worse. He drained it with a sump pump, let it dry 2 days, screened the first flush barrel properly, patched the leak again, and extended the divert volume so more of the dirty first wash would bypass the cistern before the valve shifted. The second rain, 10 days later, came in cleaner. By the third rain, 3/4 of an inch in late June, he pumped a bucket, held it to the light, and it was clear enough to see through, with only a thin skim of silt settled at the bottom after half an hour. He called Hanley and said the cistern had a sound cover, a locked hatch, a pump, a fence, and a non-potable label, and that he'd bring photographs. Hanley said he'd noted in the file, but that any collateral revision would wait on a second visit. Eli said he understood and went back to work. He didn't know yet what August was going to ask of that water. The drought of 1988 is still talked about in southern Iowa. It didn't come all at once. It came as heat that started early in June and stayed, the kind of high pressure that sits over a place and holds it down like a hand pressed flat. Corn leaves rolled by noon and stayed rolled. Ponds shrank and left a ring of cracked mud at the margin. Men started checking their wells before breakfast, listening for the pump to cycle right. At the sale barn, cows came in early, not because they were fat, but because their owners couldn't water them, and the price that week reflected exactly that. In late July, Eli's well started to show it. The pump short-cycled, on for 30 seconds, off, on again 4 minutes later. The pressure tank banged. The kitchen faucet spat air. The stock tank the well fed took longer to fill in the evening, and had dropped again. By morning, he called Clyde Ransom. Clyde put his hand on the pipe and listened. "Your pump isn't the problem," he said. "The well's tired. You're pulling the column down faster than it comes back. Put in a bigger pump and it just pulls air faster. It can't pump water that isn't there." "What's the fix?" Eli said. "Deepen it. New casing, bigger pump, or drill new. I've got a rig, but with everybody calling, the earliest I can get to you is 6 weeks out. Deposit's $2,800. Total runs $4,600 to $6,900, depending what we hit." 6 weeks was not a number that helped Eli in August. He sat at the kitchen table that night with the yellow legal pad. Cistern capacity, roughly 4,500 gallons usable after sediment space. Roof catchment, about 2,200 square feet between the barn and house, good for 900 to 1,000 gallons stored per inch of rain after first flush losses. 38 cows and their calves needed close to 700 gallons a day on their own. The cistern alone would run dry in a week if he tried to make it the whole answer, and he knew that before he wrote a single number down. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to take enough load off the well that the well could recover overnight, the same way a man rests a tired horse instead of running it to the ground. Milk cow, calves, sick pen, 160 to 220 gallons a day. Garden seed rows and household washing, minimal. An emergency tank for the main herd on the worst afternoons, another 250. Call it 350 to 500 gallons a day off the cistern, and at that draw the reserve stretched 9 to 12 days before it needed rain to refill it. He wrote at the bottom of the page, "Cistern does not replace the well. It keeps the well from being asked for water it does not have." He opened the hatch every morning after that, pumped into a covered transfer tank, and gravity fed it by hose to the calf pen and the milk cow's bucket. 200 strokes on the pitcher pump moved about 30 gallons. Slow work. It moved water. The complications came the way they always do, one at a time. August 11. The hand pump began losing prime on the downstroke. The leather cup had dried and cracked in the heat. He drove to the farm supply in Centerville, bought a replacement for $8. 40, reassembled it, and it held prime again. 40 minutes lost, most of it in the heat with sweat in his eyes. But the pump worked and the morning draw went out on schedule. August 14. A brief storm dropped 4/10 of an inch on the gauge, the kind of rain he'd hoped would refill the cistern in a hurry. Most of it ran off the baked, hard ground before it could reach the gutters. The barn catchment delivered about 280 gallons, a quarter of what a full inch would have given him. It wasn't nothing. It also wasn't enough to change his math. He logged it and kept going. August 17. He lifted the hatch to pump and caught a musty smell off the water. He filled a bucket, let it settle, smelled it again. Organic, algae or leaf matter breaking down in the heat, nothing chemical, but not something he was willing to put in front of a calf. He didn't use that batch. He dumped it on the garden rows instead, cracked the hatch for air circulation, and let the cistern sit a day before pumping again. The smell was down by morning, but he'd lost a day's draw he didn't have to spare. August 19. A calf, crowding the tank in the afternoon heat, knocked it over. 40 gallons of cistern water gone into the dirt before he could get to it. He moved the tank to a corner where it couldn't be tipped again and added a second post to brace it. He hauled water twice that month. August 16. When the cistern was low and the calves were restless in the afternoon heat, he drove to Bloomfield and paid $48 for a load straight into the main herd tank. August 22. When the well was short-cycling badly and he didn't want to draw the cistern any lower than it already was, he drove again. 2 trips, $96. He had projected 0 hauling back in June. 2 trips wasn't 0, but the alternative, hauling every day from the second week of August forward, at $48 a trip, would have run somewhere between $576 and $720 before the well had a chance to recover, and that didn't count the days he wouldn't have been fixing fence or putting up hay because he'd have been on the road to town instead. The rain came on August 24th, a true rain, 6 hours of it, 7 inches on his gauge. He stood on the porch and listened to it run off the tin roof, through the gutter, past the diverter, and into the cistern. By morning, the notched stick showed it within 18 inches of full. He checked the forecast. The high pressure was breaking down. He wasn't going to need to haul again. He sat at the kitchen table in September and totaled the summer. Water hauling, 2 loads, $96, against an alternative of daily hauling for 16 days at $48 a day, $768. Avoided cost, $672. The calves hadn't gone off water. The milk cow had held her production through August. He hadn't sold a single cow at the Drought sale barn in August, when the prices there were the worst they'd been in 2 years. The cistern was not worth more than the well in a normal year. It was worth more in the 12 days when the well needed rest and the drill rig was 6 weeks away. The fall calf check came in October. 34 calves, average weight 498 pounds, at 79 cents a pound on the steers and 72 cents on the heifers, a weighted average of 77 cents across the lot. Gross, $13,039. Out of the operating account that summer had already gone the $759 cistern repair and the pump cup replacement in August. The fall interest payment on the operating note came to $4,820. The calf check covered it. He drove to the bank in November and set a folder on Hanley's desk. Inside, the repair receipts from all 3 weekends, the water log with daily entries from June through August, the 2 hauling receipts at $48 apiece, the calf weight tickets from the October sale, and a letter from Clyde Ransom describing the well's condition through the drought and the reasoning behind the 6-week wait for the drill rig. He'd also included a photograph, hatch closed and locked, fence in place, the pump handle with its not potable label, the first flush barrels screened and connected to the gutter. Hanley went through the folder page by page, the way a man goes through numbers he half expects not to add up. He looked at the log first. You ran the cistern how many days? Continuously from July 31st through August 23rd, Eli said, with 2 breaks, the pump cup on the 11th and the day the water went musty on the 17th. Hanley looked at the hauling receipts next. 2 trips. 2 trips. He set the folder down and was quiet for a moment. Hanley didn't change the cistern from hazard to asset. It was still a hole in the ground with water in it and a non-potable label on the pump. He crossed out what he'd written in May, abandoned cistern. Hazard, no contributory value, and wrote instead, covered and fenced cistern with hand pump, emergency non-potable stock water reserve, roof fed, operational August 1988. I still have to call it non-potable, he said. I never called it drinking water, Eli said, but it kept the stock watered. That was the job. The note renewed at the standard rate. Not because the cistern was worth a fortune, because it showed Eli had a reserve, and a farm with a reserve is a better risk than a farm with only a well that pulls air. Harold Pike came by after the drought broke and the pastures were getting their color back. He stood at the fence and looked at the cover, the lock, the rail, the pump. Mine's under 3 loads of brick, he said. Eli said nothing. How much did yours hold? Enough to make the well last. Harold was quiet a moment. You think a man could dig one back out? Depends how bad he needs to know, Eli said. Harold didn't apologize. He just asked. That's how it works. The cistern was still a hole in the ground. Eli never pretended otherwise. That was why it had a cover, a rail, a lock, and a pump, and why the children knew where the key hung and knew not to touch it without him. The bank had not been wrong to call it dangerous. The insurance man had not been wrong to ask for a cover. Harold had not been wrong to fear his own. But they had all judged the cistern by what it could take. Eli had judged it by what it could hold. The new well gave pressure when the ground had water to give. The old cistern gave reserve when the ground did not. It never once wrote him a check. It never made him money in a normal year, and in a normal year nobody would have thought to ask it to. What it did was sit under a rotten cover for 20 years doing nothing, and then hold still and wait through one summer when the ground ran short, and give back exactly what the roof had put into it months before anybody was thirsty. In August of 1988, with the drill rig 6 weeks out and the herd still needing water every morning, reserve was worth more than pressure. That was the only calculation that mattered, and it was what his father had meant all along. In a kitchen drawer notebook, nobody had priced until the year it counted. Would you fill an old cistern, or lock it, cover it, and keep it for the drought?